So we have Leanne is here too.
Consuelo. Moreno Valley. All right. That's just right up the street from us in my husband's county, Riverside County. Thank you,
Oh,
Consuelo, for being here.
yes, Consuela.
Right.
Davis, Tracy Harris.
Nice to meet everybody. Nice to see you here. Well, do we want to give them a few more minutes or do we want to get started?
Yeah, because I know you know how they pour in throughout as we're going. So, okay. So where's Honor?
She's there. She's NASP.
I'm
Oh,
here. I'm just in the background. I've moved it.
Honor, I feel safe when you're there.
I'm here to support you guys.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, well, welcome everybody. Today we have the honor and the privilege to have a distinguished panel, and we are very excited to be able to tackle this subject. So today we are focusing on men as mentors, allies, and advocates in elevating women in leadership. And so Andrea and I are the fellows for the Center for Women in Leadership for NAESP. And we have been doing a national book study. And the book is Leading While Female. And we get, every month, we meet with our book study facilitators. So it's going from this national book study to facilitators who then we meet with them every month, who then go out to their groups and meet with them. So it has really taken off. And this chapter is actually a chapter from the book. And we thought, how amazing would it be if we were able to bring in a fabulous panel of men, educational leaders that have helped to open doors for lots of females. And that's what we have here today. So I'd like to introduce myself. I am Jessica Gomez, and I am a principal in Colton, California, and also one of the co-fellows of NAESP Center for Women in Leadership. Andrea?
Okay, and I'm Andrea, Dr. Thompson, as some will say. And of course, I am the founder of Parent as Tutors. And of course, I'm one of the fellows for NAESP's Women in Leadership, that center. And then on top of that, I am an AP. And I try not to say it because if I hear it, I may quit because I'm wondering how comes I'm doing all of this. So, but in everything that I do, I pour my heart out. And Jessica, it is such a joy working with you. I always have to say that.
Same. Okay, on our next slide. Next slide, please. So, Andrea, you want to go ahead and hand it over to Gracie?
Okay, Gracie. Gracie, could you go ahead and do us the honor of introducing Dr. Franks?
Absolutely. I have the privilege tonight of introducing my boss, Dr. Earl Franks. He's the executive director of the National Association of Elementary School Principals, better known as NAESP. Now, if you would ask Dr. Franks about his job, he would say that he proudly serves elementary and middle level education leaders with innovation and inspiration. Dr. Franks comes to NASP from the Council for Leaders in Alabama Schools, where he served as executive director. Now, a few things you might find interesting about Dr. Franks. He's an avid runner. He's very active in Rotary, and he has one of the most photogenic and cutest dogs that I've ever seen, named Bella. He is also a former band director, so I greatly appreciate him being the leader of the band at NASP.
Oh, wow.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
And Dr. Franks, would you like to add anything to that?
I think Gracie covered it all. It's my honor to be here this evening.
Great. Thank you so much. Next slide, please. So I have the honor of introducing Dr. Edwin Gomez, who serves as the 13th Riverside County Superintendent of Schools. And in his role, Dr. Gomez works with the county's 23 school districts and the staff at the Riverside County Office of Education to ensure high quality education that invests in all students while developing and sustaining strong collaborative relationships with students, teachers, parents, and community for student success. So he's actually began his educational career teaching in grades K through 8 and has been really moved up the ranks through the district office, has been superintendent at 2 school districts in San Bernardino and Riverside counties. And also he happens to be my husband. So Dr. Edwin Gomez, would you like to share a few more words about yourself?
No, just very honored, and thank you, Jessica. Thank you to everyone who's on this call this evening. Just very honored to be here. I think this is a very critical conversation that really requires a lot of emphasis, and I'm just very happy to be part of it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Gomez. And now, because we're going in alphabetical order, I have the great pleasure of introducing Superintendent Daryl Green. And he's the superintendent of the largest school district in the state of Delaware. He has a passion for children, family, community, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And it gives me great pleasure at this time to turn it over to Dr. Daryl Green, who's going to tell us more about what it is that he's doing along that line.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Thompson, Ms. Gomez, as well as members of the organization for inviting me this evening to just share and be a part of NAESP and this convening on the importance of women in leadership. I'm here as a direct result of a female leader who kind of pushed me to get into educational leadership. I was happy and content being a 4th grade teacher. And Cheryl Arnold, who was my principal at the time, saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And in turn, I've been trying to pay it forward since day one of becoming, an instructional leader and really valuing not only the contributions, but the knowledge and expertise that women play in our field. So just happy to be here, honored to be here this evening to represent the state of Delaware with my colleague, Michael Saylor, and also join this esteemed group of panelists as we discuss this very important topic, as Dr. Gomez indicated.
Thank you, Dr. Green. Now, Jessica.
Sorry, I was muted. I was talking to myself. Thank you, Superintendent Green. I'd like to go ahead and introduce her to you, Dr. Andy Jacks. And Dr. Andy Jacks is a principal at Ashland Elementary in Manassas, Virginia. He's a very well-respected and experienced leader with a track record of connecting with colleagues and creating powerful professional networks. Dr. Jack's role is to facilitate learning and professional growth related to current and emerging issues here for the centers for all of the centers here in NAESP. And Dr. Jacks, you've been a really dear friend to me. You've been so influential in connecting me and building my professional network. Could you share a little bit more about yourself?
Well, yes, and thank you for being a part of this. I feel very honored, and thank you as a dear friend and seeing your growth. And Angie's growth with this center has been not surprising knowing you, and your leadership is just shining right through. I have to really applaud Dr. Franks and Dr. Branch, the vision that Dr. Franks had for these kind of conversations to exist through NAESP, so that we could have a center that was highly focused on these kind of, as we said earlier, the critical need and this essential conversation to have. And you need forums. I'm sure we'll talk about that tonight, but you need forums and a time and place to have these conversations. Otherwise, they may not happen otherwise. So I really appreciate the vision and the action behind the idea to make these things happen. So thank you, Jessica and Andrea, for this. And I'm going to follow up with earlier comment about appreciating the leadership of those that came before us. So Carolyn De La Flor was the principal that really gave me my opportunities as a teacher. And she pushed me and gave me things I didn't deserve at the time, but she believed in me probably more than I believed in myself at a very early age for me. And that gave me every chance at kind of moving forward like I did. So Carolyn De La Flor right there. So thank you, guys.
You're welcome. Thank you, Dr. Jacks. And now it gives me such great pleasure to introduce Dr. Saylor, who I would call a friend also, and he's over school leadership for the Delaware Department of Education. Dr. Saylor is also a professor at the university, and he's always championing a lot of initiatives around elevating women in leadership. You will find that there are many initiatives going on all over the country, and he's leading them around equity. He's also doing quite a lot with Delaware's Department of Education. And at this time, Dr. Saylor, could you please expound on what I just talked about?
I think I'd have my finger on that unmute button at this point in the day after lots of Zooming. But thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you so much for including me tonight in this discussion and on this panel. It's great to be in the elementary world. I started my career as an elementary school teacher in Pennsylvania, and then went on to be a reading specialist and a reading coach before I moved into administration. And then I ended up in Delaware about 6 years ago when I followed my wife's career to the University of Delaware. And then I worked with Melissa White, who's on as an elementary school principal in a district in Delaware, where I worked on school improvement and the implementation of a strategic plan before moving to the Department of Education. And it's great to have Mr. Green on because he actually was on my interview panel when I interviewed for the Department of Education. So small world. And as mentioned, I do teach in one of Wallace Foundation's UPPI programs at Albany State University. So go Golden Rams. But my most important job is a dad of 3 sons. 2 are 16 and learning to drive. I have new gray hairs every day. And a dog. Everyone in my house is male except for my poor wife. So she deserves lots of grace.
Thank you so much. I am laughing because I do recall your children learning to drive and all the escapades. Never mind. Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Saylor. All right. So now we're going to go in. So here it is when we look at the program. Many people did sign up for this webinar, and a lot of times they sign up, they're not able to come on board, so therefore they want to make sure that we send the recording to them. One of the reasons we have designed it in such a way that each panel member is going to expound on different areas is because when we send the PowerPoint and the recordings out, a lot of times they do not see what goes on in the breakout room. So you will find here that each panel member is going to have about 6 to 7 minutes to expound on each area. And then we are going to go into breakout groups. And when we get back out to the breakout groups, they are going to share out on what it is they talked about with each group. So at this time, we're going to move into Jessica. Take it from here.
Yes, thank you, Andrea. So we're going to go ahead. We're going to start in the same order that we introduced. We'll just follow the same order this evening, so you all know what order you fall into based on your last names. We're going to start with Dr. Earl Franks. And Dr. Earl Franks, we'd love for you to share with us, how is it that at NAESP, you all are promoting gender equity in the organization?
Thank you, Jessica and Andrea. I think, first of all, at NAESP, in any organization, actions speak louder than words. And you have to have a culture of gender and race equity. I think it's critically important. We can talk all day about how important equity is, gender equity, but how are you producing? So personally at NAESP, I've hired 8 staff. Of those 8 staff, 88% of those have been female. So I think, again, actions speak louder than words. And on a personal note, in my 13 years serving as executive director of associations, I've had the great fortune to have 6 female presidents, and I've found them all to be very organized, very much attention to detail is very important, and they're very much team oriented. Next, I want to talk about our current NAESP staff. Currently, 80% of our staff at this time, 80% are female. Our core leadership team, 75% is female. In fact, the first executive director of NAESP was female. I followed Gail Conley in this position. She was female. The NAESP board of directors, only 29% of the NAESP board at this time are female. Currently, we're proud to have a female president, Kim Brell Barbosa Lewis, as our current NAESP president's done a fabulous job, continues to do a fabulous job. And looking at the history of the NAESP organization, 45 of the 100 past NAESP presidents were female. As you all are probably aware, we're celebrating our 100th anniversary of NAESP. So again, 45 of the 100 past presidents were female. Our zone directors, many of you may know, are selected differently in each zone. So the board members come to us, elected or selected at the zone level. And again, it's up to the individual zones of NAESP how they determine who represents that zone on the NAESP board. I am proud to announce that officers that are elected, recently we elected, our membership elected Dr. Liza Carabella Suarez will be our next vice president beginning in August of this year. Obviously, I hope you've seen the great work of this NAESP Center for Women in Leadership, the great job that's being done by our fellows Jessica Gomez and Dr. Andrea Thompson. I think this is an opportunity that, as well as our other centers for advancing leadership, about the focus on gender, race, and equity that we have at NAESP. Of our NAESP state leaders, 31 of our state representatives are female. Again, these are selected by the state affiliates. They're not selected by NAESP or the board. They're selected by state affiliates. And again, 31 state representatives are female. Our other task force we have, our current task force on race and equity, that's been working for several months. Of that group, 67% are female. And our coronavirus task force that did such a great job helping us provide services for their colleagues around the country. 62% of that group were females. So I think we've made a commitment, and I've made a personal commitment, that gender equity is very important. Also, race is very important in the equity piece at NAESP. If we can go to the next slide, please. In terms of NAESP moving forward and supporting and elevating women in top educational leadership positions, we're working extremely hard to promote the NAESP Board of Directors and recruit people who want to serve. Again, board members, zone directors are selected, elected directly in each zone. Some actually rotate among the member states in that zone. And we encourage state affiliates to consider gender and race when they select or elect their zone directors in that nomination process. Very, very important. And then the expansion and enhancement of the services, again, provided through this NAESP Center for Women in Leadership. And it was created to highlight, elevate, and support women in leadership, not only within NAESP, but in the education profession as a whole. And then in our state leaders recruitment, we encourage our state affiliates to consider gender and race. Make it known to our state leaders and our state executive directors. And if you're interested in serving in one of these roles, whether as a zone director or a state representative, I would ask you and request that you make that known to those leaders in your state, in your zone, to your state executive director. Get active and participate in your state affiliate and NAESP. Self-promotion, also encourage and nominate your colleagues, encourage them to get involved. Typically people get involved at the state level and then move up to the national level. So I hope you've been able to see in these few minutes that I've been able to share that NAESP, we are committed to gender and race equity.
Thank you, Dr. Franks. We really do appreciate the leadership role that you've taken in ensuring that actions speak louder than words. So next we'd like to ask Dr. Gomez. So Dr. Gomez, we'd love for you to first touch on the topic of advocating for women in securing and sustaining leadership positions from a male leadership role, just expanding on the idea of how one can support this for female leaders.
Thank you, Jessica, and once again, good evening to everyone. I think when we talk about sustaining and securing leadership positions for women, it's important for men to be truly allies. And I think when we tease out that word allies, I think we have to realize that men need to be advocates, they need to be champions, they need to be promoters, supporters. They have to be very, very intentional about positioning women in positions of authority, to ensure that they are successful, validating their credibility, their validity within the educational workforce. I think we all know that the truth is many female leaders are not given opportunities. I think we see that every day. I think the majority of teachers in the workforce are women, but interestingly enough, the majority that are at the higher quote-unquote echelons of education, they tend to be males. And so this is a huge discrepancy, a huge problem that needs to be changed, it needs to be reversed. I think when I think of the superintendent level, sometimes boards are leery, I don't think they're as welcoming to women as they are with men. Sometimes the superintendent search firms that are out there recruiting and trying to get applicants into their pools, they're also leery of women for whatever reasons, which obviously we know it's wrong, it's discriminatory, it's very bias driven and not driven by the experience, by the success of women candidates. And so I feel it's very, very important when hiring a cabinet member, whether it's a deputy superintendent, whether it's a superintendent, men have to be intentional in recruiting and hiring women, understanding that the challenge for a woman to ascend to a position of that authority is extremely difficult. There's lots of obstacles to overcome. I believe, and I think it's backed up by research, that it is easier for a male and for a man to enter into management, into leadership positions. And obviously there's a discrepancy in pay as well. And so I think it's important to be cognizant of it. I think we have to be very, very acutely aware of what's taking place, maybe because of my background being raised by a single mother for 9 years of my life, seeing her work 2 to 3 jobs, knowing the struggles that she had to overcome to really foster a caring environment for my brothers and I. Maybe I'm biased in that sense, but I realize that women are strong. I believe that women are leaders. And so for me, in my experience, maybe because of that experience, I've wanted to give women opportunities to ascend. So in my career, I've actually hired 3 women that I've mentored that became superintendents. Most recently, I hired the first female deputy superintendent in Riverside County that serves over 430,000 students, 515 schools, 23 school districts. And so for me, I think that intentionality is extremely important. Once you hire female cabinet members, I think it's also important that whether you're male or female, that you provide these support systems to ensure that your cabinet members are successful, that they feel connected, that they feel supported, that they feel in tune. And so I think that has been very, very important in my position in being an ally to our female counterparts. I also think it's important to create a culture, right? It's not just the superintendent or the people that are doing the hiring, but I also think it's important that leaders create a culture that is effusive, where the culture, the stakeholders, the students, the principals, the people that are being led also embrace those female leaders. I think it's important that we set those examples, that we set those expectations, that we're very clear with that. And then the last piece that I would say that's very important, and maybe it's applicable to this conversation or maybe it's not, but I really believe in strong, robust superintendent contracts. And especially when boards are hiring females, it's very, very important that the female prospective superintendent has a strong contract that protects them and their family. And so what I mean by that is, for example, with the strong maybe legal representation, I would voucher that superintendents coming into a new district have a supermajority clause in their contract. That basically means that in order for the board to terminate that contract, there would have to be a supermajority vote to actually eliminate the position or to fire that superintendent. I think oftentimes it's very easy for boards when crises emerge, when there's conflict, They just want to get rid of that superintendent. But when there's provisions that protect the superintendent and her family, it's much harder to do so. I would also argue for things such as arbitration. So when there's disputes, when board members are not getting along with the superintendent, they should go to arbitration and try to find a way to find mutual solutions. So in short, I think that for me, it's important to validate, to acknowledge and recognize that having a woman, regardless of her being a mother, being a wife, those are all assets. Those are all things that we can take in and learn from. And I think, once again, the adage of, taking action and action speaks louder than words is truly applicable in this instance. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gomez. Could you just talk a little bit on recognizing and valuing the unique challenges that women have in their home life? I mean, obviously, we're married, so you see what you're very busy, I'm very busy, but just in general, just talking on the topic of the extra responsibilities female leaders tend to carry. Can you speak a little bit on that and how you see it from a male perspective?
Yeah, I think.
Male leadership.
Thank you, Jessica. I think it's just really important to acknowledge that. It's important for men to realize that women sleep less than men. That women, and this is not something that I'm making up. This is based on research. Women are definitely more engaged with the children, more engaged with the family, and so seeing that as a deficit, I think, is an error. I think we have to validate that. We have to acknowledge that. We have to praise that, and most importantly, we have to recognize that women still are 110% committed to their jobs, regardless of whatever responsibilities we may have outside of work. I think it's important that we encourage, that we motivate, that we always, one of the things that's very important to me is always to be there for your employees, be there for your cabinet members, be there for your teachers, and say, you know what, during times of challenge, during times of frustration, be there emotionally, be a support system to your team, whether they're female, whether they're male. I think it's important to have that compassion, to have those systems of support to really help them. And one of the other things that I would add to that is I always encourage people in general, and women, of course, most importantly in this, I talk about this concept of living in the end, living in the end. And what that basically means is having goals, right? When you reach your goal of living in the end, what is it going to look like? Once you finish your career, once your kids have left, once everything has been paid off, what is it going to look like? What is it going to feel like? What are you going to want from your career? And backwards map from there. What do you need to accomplish with your family? What goals do you have for your children? What goals do you have for your economic forecast? What outcomes do you have for your professional life? What do you have for your health goals? And I think that for me, when we talk about those things, sometimes we get so stuck in the rigmarole of the day-to-day nonsense that we don't see the end. We don't really think about the end. But I try to live my life from the end, looking back. And that really helps me to clarify my goals and balancing my family life, which I need to do better, to be very honest with you. But it also helps me to know what I need to achieve and how to achieve it, but I'm already there.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
Jessica.
Dr.
I hate to interrupt. This is your time. You could have just called about anything you wanted to do.
I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm like, we're a team. We're a team. Okay. So thank you, Dr. Gomez, for those very, very great comments. And now we'd like to move over to Superintendent Green. And Superintendent Green, would you please speak to us a little more about recognizing and seeking to eliminate biases in the workplace, especially from the perspective of a superintendent who oversees a large organization?
Thank you, Jessica. And again, to Dr. Franks and Dr. Gomez for starting us off, and I think hitting so many key points just in terms of the advocacy that's needed, the realization of the role that women play in positions of leadership, and then ultimately how we shouldn't let our biases ultimately determine the plight of so many capable leaders. And I refer to them as leaders, and I think we oftentimes let our biases play into when we identify them as women leaders. So I think that's an initial bias that you kind of go into it with, is identifying that leader as a woman leader. We don't do that for men. We allow our unconscious bias. So really going from the the technical, the transformational, but really starting off just understanding that bias is that prejudice that favors for someone or something. And typically, again, as it plays out in leadership and specifically educational leadership, men are viewed as strong, charismatic leaders, and we allow those biases that typically define, stereotypical or generalizing, female leaders unconsciously, but also consciously, and consciously being that explicit bias, where systemically that it creates barriers. The idea of motherhood and motherhood not allowing women to fulfill their roles or their responsibilities as a leader, but then that unconscious bias, going into it of just thinking that, women should play in specific roles while you're valuable as a teacher leader, you don't necessarily transition well to a building level leader and allowing those unconscious biases to play out. And so I think as a system, we need to acknowledge and be intentional about, hiring and attracting and recruiting and interviewing, women in positions of leadership. And then not only the recruitment and retention or interviewing, but ultimately putting them in place and not allowing our unconscious biases to kind of play default as to why they wouldn't be good in that particular role, and giving men the benefit of the doubt, as we historically see when you look at, again, as Dr. Gomez indicated, the research that speaks to that. Dr. Eric Kandel, he estimated that about 80 to 90% of our minds work unconsciously. And so that idea of that unconscious mind, that implicit bias really plays out in all of those things, right? Our hiring practices, the way that we interview, the way that, again, we go through that contractual obligation of a superintendent's contract, a man versus a female. I mean, we see it play out not only in education, but across the board as it relates to women are okay in a C-suite level, but as it gets to actually being that executive, that chief operating officer, we create systemic barriers for them. And then the retention, and I would say the in-service support, not allowing women leaders or leaders who happen to be female, I would say, flounder in that position. And I've seen that time and time again, where they're kind of put in a position. And then when struggles or obstacles or challenges come, when you look at the support that they've been afforded versus male counterparts, that support system often isn't there. And then we play to those unconscious biases, right? Oh, that they were power hungry. You see those tropes and things that tend to play out where it fits that narrative or that implicit bias that we assume that this is how it's going to play out. It's the idea of that self-fulfilling prophecy. And so for me in general, and again, as I open, I'm in this position as a result of a strong leader, Dr. Cheryl Arnold, who put me in a position, as Dr. Jackson indicated, who saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. So why don't we afford that same liberty, that same grace, and that same ability to females who aspire to attain, positions of leadership? And so that idea of retention and in-service support, what do we look for? How are we creating networks so that female leaders can support one another? I just read a wonderful article by Dr. Thompson and Ms. Gomez, just around, really going beyond gender and looking at design thinking. Do we actually consult with our female leaders? And I can honestly say I sit here, Delaware has 19 school districts, and of the 19 school districts, there's currently one female superintendent, soon to be two, in a neighboring district as well. And I'm the only superintendent of color. And so we routinely see this play out time and time again, and the more that we acknowledge it, the more resistance that we have to it. So again, we have to be intentional about how we engage leaders who happen to be female, and that engagement is ongoing communication, consistent communication, and the idea of state interviews, what's keeping them in that position, knowing the hardships of motherhood, knowing the hardships of, the trials and tribulations that they face as females in positions of leadership. And so do we have that open door? And thankfully for me, and I've been in my position currently going on, starting my third year, and I routinely give my cabinet, I seek input for female leaders within my cabinet, principal leadership, give me your input, give me your insight. And I've always have been fortunate enough to do that. One, again, having a strong-willed mother who, again, knowing their hardships. My wife is a high school world language teacher, who is, securing her ESL certification and was continually inspired. And I tell her she would be a great leader. but in her mind, she's always second guessing, or questioning. So it's really that idea of, ongoing engagement and communication. I think is critically important to, us putting females in the positions of leadership, but then ultimately understanding that when we sow those seeds of leadership and we support them, the harvest that we reap in education, from student success to staff success to ultimately community success, I've been fortunate enough to reap those rewards by having strong females in positions of leadership, whether that would be on my team or supporting the schools that we're entrusted in leading. So I think that idea of recognizing and seeking to eliminate bias in the workplace is critical. And I think we have to focus on inclusivity and diversity, and also understanding that, women are not a monolithic group. Looking at intersectionality in terms of the wide range of perspectives that women bring to positions of leadership. I think we have to be intentional about that. And then ultimately encouraging peer-to-peer recognition in public forums. I know too often that, and I've always found this interesting in education. We're actually on the process now of identifying our teachers of the year. How many, men will not hesitate to take credit. I mean, we take credit before it's even, we steal credit. I'm just going to be frank. No, but we will acknowledge the hard work of other people and take the credit for it. But the humility that I've seen so many females play out, where they don't want the recognition because of how it might be perceived, whether that would be amongst their peers or in the field. So really encouraging and identifying in public forums. Routinely, I do my monthly superintendent's report. We have to give credit where credit is due and give credit to those who are actually leading that. So I think, eliminating that bias is really creating a culture where women feel like they belong, and where they know they can thrive and feel supported. And unless we're intentional really about doing that and going about it through all areas, my transportation supervisor is a female leader, and she's nationally recognized. So Kelly Shahan, who leads, all of that is highly important. And when things go right, we have to acknowledge that. It's just not when we have the bus accidents or routes aren't on time or different things aren't working out. We have to give credit where credit is due. So I think really acknowledging and signing, women to diverse groups, where traditionally, we're closed off to that cabinet level, right? Let's get the input of others. No, how are we bringing building level leaders, classroom teachers, teacher leaders into that fold to really lend a diverse perspective to achieve a common goal amongst our organization. So again, I think we have to be truly intentional about eliminating bias and calling it, the same way when we talk about disrupting bullying, we need to disrupt gender bias and things within our organization. So when we see it, it's up to men to say something and not for women to just kind of beat that drum and support one another. We need to serve as advocates and interrupters in that space as well, if we want our organizations to thrive and continue to succeed.
Thank you, Superintendent Green. And then can you just touch really quickly on the board policies and examining board policies when it comes to issues of gender inequity?
Yeah, and so again, I started with, this is transformational work, and I think we're at a tipping point within our society. Again, when we can hear the rally cries, we can see the resistance, we can feel the protests, and we can either resist or push back against it, or we need to come to grips with understanding that we need to embrace it. And so I put in there Title VII, which obviously is part of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, because that's the technical application when we're talking about policy. Obviously, we have Title IX, we have all of these, but then we find the organizational or institutional workarounds, right, to avoid that, where we look at, how are we avoiding tokenism, right? And those various aspects that lend itself to say, and again, I go back to Dr. Frank's point about action. Are we really action oriented? Or do we create policies that look good on paper and sound good? Or are we actually living out or acting out those policies? And so, really looking at gender inequality means fairness and treatment for men and women according to their respective needs. But then it talks about the idea of equity and ensuring that we give females the resources that they need to thrive. Again, and I'm firsthand seeing my wife as an educator. I'm a superintendent. She's a high school world language teacher. And when I tell you she works harder than I do, she works harder than I do. Because at the end of the night, my son, we have 3 children. I have a high school junior, a rising freshman in high school and a soon to be sixth grader, they won't wake me up in the middle of the night. So when we had that idea of women get less sleep, they're going to mom, but she still has the same level of expectation and accountability when she wakes up the next day to be on point and to do a productive job. So really understanding, how our policies are demonstrate gender equity and equality, and then going just beyond. And I will encourage everyone to read this article that Dr. Thompson and Ms. Gomez penned, because it does something that I've introduced to my district, is this idea of design thinking. And, how do policies actually impact women? And if women don't have a voice in the structure of those policies, then we're going to miss the mark every time. And so really going through and looking at our policies. NSBA, which is the National School Boards Association, is another good resource to really look at policy writing. And again, women are not a monolithic group. So really looking at their intersectionality, really looking at beyond gender, just being strictly male-female, looking at other, gender groups, LGBTQ, really unpacking that in terms of what our school communities and what our communities as a whole represents, to ensure that we're not, in essence, supporting or advocating for policies that create and perpetuate and promote ongoing institutional systemic barriers within our organizations and institutions.
Thank you, Superintendent Green. We really appreciate all the insight that you've given us from an acting superintendent and sees all of these things in play day in and day out. I'd like to go ahead and move on to Dr. Andy Jacks. Dr. Jacks, could you speak to us about including male participation in family-friendly policies, specifically maybe from the role of the principal, but from any particular role as a leader who happens to be male?
Sure, again, happy to be here. I'm always coming from multiple angles, just like all of us, as a dad, as a school leader, as a community member. I've been a principal for 11 years. I've hired multiple assistant principals and hired administrative interns during that time. I've hired one male, two female assistant principals, and seeing the different personalities come through regardless of gender and the different strengths and abilities has been very eye-opening and a very much of a learning experience for myself. Additionally, working with so many women leaders within central office and other colleagues. I work in a large school division, so Prince William County Schools is about 100,000 students. So we have, many school leaders that collaborate on a regular basis. So many of them are women. And so learning from all of them has been not just interesting, but something that I've realized I've had to do more of an ongoing advocacy for sort of a neutral playing field as we're talking about tonight. So today I'm going to talk about this family-friendly policies, and on the next slide we'll get into how we can sort of collaborate and look at networks of women leadership. For this topic here, family-friendly policies, I wanted to come across sort of two angles of this, like I was talking about, coming from the community aspect of it. As a school leader, as much as I want to talk about my staff, I also believe that how we interact with our staff and how we interact with our community should be very aligned. So I shouldn't have a double standard, basically. I treat my staff one way, I treat my community another way. I can't be so understanding of my, moms that are coming in as parents, but then not understanding of my moms that are staff members. I feel like I have to really align those practices. For me, like we've talked about so much, I don't know that at the, at the beginning of my career, I was so empathetic, I want to say. I think I was very just driven and I wanted to get stuff done. And over time, as I have 3 kids and a wife and a family and just gone through real life experiences, like today, my life was like that. I won't get into it. Today was a real life experience in many ways. And when you go through those experiences, you just realize how people have life and the job is not the only thing that they're doing on a daily basis. And you can be hardcore. And I believe you could be extremely passionate about your job, but you won't be a full leader, like a well-rounded, complete leader, unless you really understand and take into account all of the life that the person is sort of bringing to the table. So for me, I really think about how we're aligning these practices for the community. When we're working with staff, I put here, personalize, don't patronize. This idea that we can personalize the work that people do very easily, frankly. Not everyone has to do the same thing all the time, and really making sense for what they have going on, and that one day they're going to bring more to the table than the next day, and that's okay. But I think what's really important, and this is something I tried to really work on over time, is to not patronize them, not like really like grant them this time. That time is not my time. That time is their time. They're giving me their time on a regular basis. So when they do extra work or all these things, it's not like that's my time, and I don't control their time. So if they need something, it's really more of, working with them on kind of, how much can I offer them? And that's the one thing I try to work on a lot now, which is, if they need something, just help them out. My first response can't be, if they didn't show up at a meeting or if they didn't turn something in, it can't be, how come you didn't do that? It's, what can I do for you? How can I help you? Because I'm sure there's something going on. And when we talk about, working with men in the community and men in schools, one of the things I've noticed too is that there is that definitely double standard of working with females and working with males as staff. So especially males tend to drive other males in a different way than they would females. So we may be actually more understanding for a female because they may be a mom, but then if there's a male worker that's a dad and they want to have that same sort of balance or same sort of responsibilities at home, we tend not to treat them the same way. We sometimes tend to be tougher on them, like, why would you do that? That's your wife's job, kind of thing, which sounds so bad saying that, but I think that could be a standard that's out there that we have to watch out for. So if a male comes in, it's a teacher or something, and says, I need to go home and take I need to be off today because I take my child to a doctor's appointment, we can't even blink at that. That's something they have to do, just like if they were a mom to have to do. So I think really making sense that they're sort of equal in that how we treat them is really important. In a lot of ways, getting dads in the community into school is really important. We added a watchdog program to make sure that we could get dads in school more often. And as we did that, we saw that dads would just be more included on a regular basis. One of the things we always think about is when we call home, who do you call first? Do you call mom or dad? Right? What do you think the answer to that is? I should have done a poll on that one. Right? Typically you call mom, but why is that? It's because we are automatically setting this stereotype on who is the main caretaker for that child. But in the modern role of a parent, we hope both parents are equally responsible and want to be responsible for this child. So really working with our staff to include dads on a regular basis in everything we do, I think sets the tone on how we treat all of our staff. But honestly, I was looking at our notes here, is that realistic balance. That what do we really expect people to be able to do? And if you're constantly expecting people to work overtime all the time, then you're not really being honest with the sort of real life that we have. And knowing that you can push, but then you're going to have to ease up at times. And I think the more that we do this, we'll have more of a kind of understanding of these sort of expectations. I worked with one of my principals I used to work with, Janet Greer, Dr. Greer, and when I was assistant principal, I think that was when I was really driven. I was trying to get stuff done. I didn't really understand when she was just what I would call giving in to people all the time. She would just give in to teachers all the time. And I've never really understood that. In fact, it drove me crazy. Like, why is she giving in all the time? But then as I became principal, many years later, I realized that she was not giving in. She truly cares about them. And if she truly cares about them and she wants them to handle their life and to be able to deal with the things they need to deal with, then that's something that she will do. She will give in, because in the long run, you're not giving in. Like I said here, when you're extending grace and patience, you're not lowering your standard for your organization. You're not saying that, everything's going to fall apart in your organization. If anything, you're raising your own standard as a leader to be more understanding and more patient with those that you work with. So that's something I think that all leaders need to think about, talk about, something that for me has been, I'm here where I am now. I'm definitely here where I am now, but I'm not where I was. And I think that's how life is. We should be growing and getting better and more understanding over time. So if you want to hit the next slide. So in this, talking about this, I'll start with a story talking about women's networks and collaboratives. And I really feel humbled here because I don't know that I'm the best one. I think the ladies here are the probably better ones to say how to grow networks with other women. In this, I think it's really important to talk about very practical strategies that you can do. Sometimes we talk about big programs or big philosophical changes that need to happen. But the reality is sometimes these things are very detailed little moments in time where basically you have to stand up and say something. I'll give you one example. So I was in this task force working on Return to Learn for next school year. And we had a group of leaders, principals, that were in a Zoom session working behind the scenes on some plans. And out of those group, one of the team members, a male, wanted to grab a smaller group to work on something. And so he said, all right, Andy, so-and-so, so-and-so, all right, you come with me. We're going to go work on this, get it done. And of course, all of them are male, of course. And I had with me one of my colleagues who I work hand in hand with, another great principal, a female. And I don't know why. It's probably because of the work of the center here that I was thinking about so much. But I just thought right then, like, why isn't she involved? Why was I picked versus her? Probably because we're friends, I guess, but she is just as good of a leader as me. So I was very intentional at basically making them include her on every step of the way. And she appreciated it, of course, but I also, to me, I didn't think I was doing anything like a superhero. I felt very, I don't know, I felt pretty bad about the whole situation. Like I really should maybe stepping down and letting her stand up. And I think as males, we just want to be and do and go and be out front so many times. We just don't even think about the fact that sometimes as a leader, you need to give out, you need to give up something. It's sort of like a sacrifice. If you want other people to have opportunities, then sometimes you won't have that same opportunity and you need to step back. So sometimes I think, we need to look at what does our inner circle look like as leaders. Does our inner circle all look like us? We talk about that race a lot of times. We don't always talk about that with gender. So make sure that your gender of your inner circle doesn't look just like you, so that you're getting different feedback from all sorts of different kinds of people. And also, like the comment here from the book, and what kind of forums are we setting, and where are those forums? Are they female friendly? Are they male friendly? Who picks where these locations are? Now everything's Zoom, but once things get back to normal, we'll have to really be thinking about, who selects how we network and what we do at those different times and places. So again, happy to be here and have this conversation, something that I think I'm going to try to advocate more for at all of our local levels, to make sure that we're diving deeper. What can we actually practically do on a regular basis to promote more women leaders?
Thank you, Dr. Jax. Wonderful, wonderful insights. If you've been reading the chat, you've been able to see that everyone is loving this amazing panel. The insights that you all are giving is just phenomenal perspectives, and we truly do appreciate that. So we're going to go ahead and round it out now with Dr. Saylor and finishing us off. And Dr. Saylor, could you talk to us a little bit, share with us a little bit more about mentoring women with intention and purpose? And I know the other panelists talked about that as well, but can you continue to give us a little more on that?
Sure, absolutely. So when I think about the role of a mentor, I always go to this quote. It really resonates with me. Just because we're a mentoring relationship that I had when a superintendent asked me to leave the classroom, which I did not want to do, and coerced me with a title of teacher on assignment, and I never went back to the classroom after that. And then that superintendent continued to encourage me to get my PhD and continue to grow in my leadership. So does anybody know who that quote is from? If you do, put it in the chat, please. It's got to be a quote by a famous female. Who is it? There it is, Amy Grundy. I'm so glad Amy's here. So Amy's here from Delaware. So thank you. That is from Oprah. It is an Oprah quote. And I underlined the word hope because I want you to take one moment and think about what other word could you put inside that blank other than hope. A mentor is someone who allows you to see the blank inside yourself. Just give you a moment to the best inside yourself, the passion inside yourself, gifts, potential. Everybody needs mentors, whether they're male or female mentors. Everybody needs a mentor. Usually you need more than one. So I listed a few strategies there that I've used in my role to mentor females in my current role. So one thing is always approaching it as a learner. So I know that I will learn just as much from the woman that I'm working with as I hope I'm able to share with her. One way that I do this is always through shared experiences. And Andrea knows this because she is someone who is new to Delaware, and I thought, what can I get her involved in? So she was involved in our women's conference this year because I do think you need to push women because often they will not volunteer, but with a little bit of nudging, yes. So Andrea and Jessica actually presented this year at our women's conference. Another example of projects for a woman that I'm currently mentoring was in a district, and I asked her to be on a project to rewrite the administrator evaluation system for the state. So anybody that would agree to help rewrite an evaluation system, you know that they are a blessing. So she did. And through that experience, we would meet in between sessions just to talk about the work we were doing. And we finally started talking about, what do you want to do? You have a lot of potential. You're working in a district office, not in a director's role. And through that, I learned that she really had an interest in evaluation systems. She had learned a lot through the work that we were doing. And now she actually is my colleague and leads all the evaluation work for teachers in the state of Delaware. So through those shared experiences, also sometimes pushing, but with support, asking people to do things. Amy's on here. I ask her to do a whole lot. She's always one of my go-tos in the state. And then when I think about some of the challenges facing men in mentoring, and it's come up a few times here jokingly, is that, and it's from some research there, that females reported a relational, people-oriented style of listening, while males reported a more action, content, and time-oriented style of listening. So we joke around and say that, but there's actually research that says that, sure enough, women, when it comes to listening, are just better. So when I think about what I can learn, that's one thing that I've learned. I've been told before that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. That's because we're supposed to spend twice as much time listening. If we take a look at the next slide, I just want to talk about some of the things that we can do at a state level, things that we're actually doing in Delaware to help intentionally support women in leadership. One new program that I'm co-leading with our Director of Exceptional Children in the state is a new special education administrative leadership program. So creating pipelines that will allow women to move into district level leadership roles. We know that women are not as present in district office roles. There's a lot of research behind why that's possible. I'm hoping to get into some of that in my breakout session. But through this program, through our SEAL program, this year we had all but one of our fellows in that program were female. So that's going to open up some opportunities for those women to go into special education roles in our district offices. Another thing that we do in Delaware is, as a department, we partner with the University of Delaware for an annual Women Leading Delaware Education Conference. That was the conference that Jessica and Andrea this year presented at. And one of the fun things about that is that we celebrate women that day, but we also do some awards. And Amy was one of the people that I recruited to actually help with that award selection and to present some of those awards this year. Something new that we've started in Delaware is really being intentional about our novice leaders. So we do have new administrator mentoring. And interestingly enough, and I looked at it this year, all of our female assistant principals this year are being mentored by other females with the exception of one. So when I thought about our topic tonight, I also realized that there is research that tells us that women need to be mentored by other successful women. And we have that model here with this first year program. In our second year program, it shifts to a coaching model. So to mix things up this year, we have about 2/3 of those women in their second year being mentored, being coached by men. And then finally this year we rolled out our 3rd year program within our Governor's Institute for School Leadership. And in that program, the fellows in that program are all nominated by superintendents. And we were excited to see that these were our best and brightest, and 2/3 of them are female this year. And the majority of them are actually leaders of color. So we're excited that we're able to create some opportunities through that Governor's Institute for School Leadership, because as Mr. Green said, we only have one, we'll soon have 2 superintendents that are female in the state of Delaware. So by creating some of these supports as well as pipeline programs, we're hoping to elevate that role and make it more available to women in Delaware.
Thank you, Dr. Saylor. We appreciate all the work that you're doing out in Delaware, and I got to be a recipient of your advocacy and allowing Dr. Andrea Thompson and myself to be part of that Women Leading Delaware conference. Thank you for that. And so now I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Andrea. We're going to go ahead and first thank all of our panelists for sharing all of their insight. And we're going to go ahead and have an opportunity to get to talk to them a little bit more up close and personal. Andrea.
Okay, one of the things I want to just shed a little bit of insight here. Well, I know Dr. Karen Woodson might be on here. I always say I've never been an assistant principal. I've always been an associate because I'm always pushed out there to go beyond my capabilities. And of course, Dr. Saylor, he'll call me up, I need you to do this, do that. And I'm like, no, I don't want it. But I want to thank you so much for pushing me all the time. Now, one thing that I want to point out to us as leaders, as we push for diversity, equity, and inclusion, is to pay attention to the custodial staff. Because I remember, and Dr. Woodson can attest to this, is that I remember when we had a female head custodian and the fight, what she went through from the male custodians. So even as we are pushing for DEI, we have to look at every facet of the school, within the school body there. All right, so we're going to go into breakout groups. And this is the fun part. When we come back, we're going to share out.
Welcome back.
Welcome back, everybody. I don't know about your room, but our room was having a fabulous conversation. Really just dynamic conversation that we were having. Is Andrea back, right? Or where's Andrea?
Yes, I'm back.
There you go.
And I'm thinking that, okay, is everybody back?
Yes.
Okay, we still have our men on board or panel. Okay, we can't let them slip through the cracks. No. All right. So, of course, it was just wonderful. Liz, are you still here, Liz? Okay. So Liz, I know that it switched us back. So reach out to Dr. Gomez because he was talking with you. All right. So go to the next slide. So at this time, because we weren't in your groups, you're going to share out the highlights of your group. So Dr. Frank?
Thank you very much. And I was fortunate to have as my presenter in my breakout, my lovely wife, Carol, to talk about surviving and thriving as a female leader in a historically male-dominated organization like Rotary International. For those of you that may not know, Rotary is an international service organization in most cities in the United States and certainly around the world, 1.2 million Rotarians. But women were not allowed in Rotary until 1989. And Carol was the first president and her female president in her local Rotary club in Alabama, and was only the second elected female in the history of her district where she had 50 clubs. And Carol, just the takeaways that I had that you talked about how to survive and thrive. I'll let you just hit the highlights there.
Well, I think leading by example and just having, portraying the idea that gender doesn't matter. And I was there to serve the community. I was there to serve the organization. So I tried to lead by example. I wanted to make a difference in my club and my community, and having the confidence, being able to speak to anyone, letting them know that I was there to help in any way, and I was glad to meet everyone. And I think once you exude a lot of confidence and show that you're willing to do the work that it's going to take to make things successful, it doesn't matter if you're male or female. And I think I was readily accepted because I was willing to do the work, I think is what it came down to.
And she also stressed the importance of caring about people, that folks in those clubs and those male, they saw that she really did care about all of them. And that she also talked about convincing them it would be an asset to have women in their club, what having female members could bring to their club, how they could add and benefit from adding females. So thank you, Carol, for sharing that with us. And that's just a quick overview of our breakout room. Andrea?
Yeah, thank you so much, because the insight you gave was what it looks like when a woman breaks the glass ceiling. So you just shared for us the insight from the other side, which is something I'm really espousing. All right, thank you so much. And now we move now to Dr. Gomez. Go ahead, Dr. Gomez. Jessica?
You're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Sorry. Got to get that right. But I think the question that really resonated in our conversation in the breakout group is, what do you do when the leadership at the district office is male dominated and not providing women opportunities? I think it's a great question. And I know that many female leaders have found themselves in a predicament like that. And so some of the thoughts that emerged in the conversation is create your own reality. Don't wait for someone to give you that opportunity. Sometimes you got to equip yourself. You got to take charge. We talked about the concept of creating networks, sister circles that I expose myself every night to through my wife, and I live vicariously through her sometimes. It's a good thing. And I see the great, things that they're doing, encouraging one another, providing resources to one another, sharing ideas and innovation. I think it's very powerful. The other thought that came up in the conversation is build your political power and your political capital. Go to those Rotary meetings, go to the, community events, be visible, be present, help someone accomplish their dreams. And when you help someone else accomplish their dreams, then in essence, your dream will also be achieved. And that's a lesson that has really been striking to me, and it has really worked in my life. And then lastly, I would say, once again, equip yourself, always work your land, always, master your craft, get stronger at what you do, whether it's your speaking skills, your writing skills, your leadership skills. Always be mindful of developing a better skill set as you get ready for the next opportunity.
Thank you. In our group, those who know me know that I do not. I go by Maya Angelou, who says you go where you're celebrated and not where you're tolerated. So I'll check out in a minute. But in truth and in fact, one of the things, and the research speaks to it, is that whereas men will be ready to pack up and leave to go wherever the opportunities are, many times women are not. They are not willing to make that change. And a lot of times when the men do it, the men say, okay, I have an opportunity in another state. The same woman who would not do it will pack up the children and go right along. So a lot of time we talk about confidence and competence. Men do not worry about competence. They want to be confident. They confidently take the job. Then they call on their circles to support them. So I'm calling on my sisters. I need you, wherever you are, if you're feeling invisible, I need you to step out and go to where the opportunities are, just like the men do. We learn from them. Thank you so much, Dr. Gomez. Okay, next person. Okay, Superintendent Green.
And so that's actually a good segue. And I'll start by just a couple points when we talked about supporting advancement of women in positions of leadership, right? And that's a very valid point, Dr. Thompson, right? Like, how do we support you to make that move rather than have that kind of narrative play out in your mind that it's not the right move, or my children, or, you know, my parents, because I'm a caregiver. Like, I've seen it play out in so many different levels that, you know, the aspects of the home life or the structure of home life tend to, you know, become that barrier. And so really learning from and listening to Jessica and Wafa, just in terms of the affirmation that they provided and the work that I'm attempting to do, but also areas that I can continue to grow as a leader, is really supporting that advancement and really looking at it through the lens of succession planning, right? Who are those leaders who happen to be female within the organization that we should be tapping now to understand the complexity and things that they may be dealing with, to help remove those barriers or obstacles to put them in that position of leadership. And that ultimately starts with valuing, you know, voice. And so, you know, giving that constructive criticism when needed, and not allowing our implicit bias of saying, oh, well, I don't want to hurt her feelings, you know, or I don't want to, you know, allowing those types of implicit biases to play out when, you know, female leaders thrive having that constructive criticism, right? We're not going to hurt your feelings. It's like someone saying, I have 2 daughters, and it upsets me now that I have 2 daughters, and they say, oh, you throw like a girl. Well, what does throw like a girl mean? You know, so it's all of these things that literally play out in our daily lives that then go in and transition into these aspects of leadership. And so I just want to thank both Jessica and Wafa for offering up so much rich information, and just giving women, again, just the opportunity and putting them in a position. And I think the most valid point Jessica shared was also that helping female leaders, and Dr. Gomez also alluded to this, live out their purpose.
Yes.
You know, not tapping you for the position that I feel you should have, but ultimately gathering your perspective to understand what is your purpose and helping you realize that purpose as well. So rich conversation, you know, just as we see or should see men as kindergarten teachers, we need to see women as superintendents, principals, and school leaders.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much, Superintendent Green. You know, I keep calling Superintendent Green Dr. Green, and I just see you as Dr. Green. Hopefully I'll be able to say that next time. So I did put in the chat Dr. Green, but
everyone will. 2021 is my year. I'm finishing up my doctorate in organizational leadership at Wilmington University right now.
Wow. That is great. Ooh, that's wonderful. All right. So now we move on to Dr. Jack. Oh,
Dr. Jack, and I have female mentors who will help guide me through the process.
There you go. There you go.
Well, future Dr. Green, that's what I'll call you from now on, because, you know, if you put it out there, you have to live up to it. So You could do it. You could do it. So I think he just like threw a softball right up for me, because I think it leads right into the conversation we had. So we had Felicia, Michelle, thank you so much for the amazing dialogue. And we talked about, I mean, we sort of got into what's on the board here, but really we got into just what opportunities are provided to women as they're going through the ranks of exploring their leadership abilities. So many times we discuss this idea that sometimes we're picking gender and race based on checkboxes, and we want to create a diverse group. But anyone that you pick, just because they're a female or a male or anything else, they don't automatically come with a set of, you know, experiences because of that gender. You know, women can be very nurturing, but women can be fierce and competitive and all the above. And so I think it's really important that if you're picking things like, you know, when we hire, we go through interview questions. And so we could dig deeper into the personality and the characteristics that someone's bringing to the table. But when we're setting things up like task forces or committees or work groups that we do, are we always looking in depth like that to find out people's individual purposes or goals or characteristics or background experiences to bring to the table? Because ultimately once they get there, like we were talking in our group, Felicia, right? Like you want to make sure that once you're there, you better be open to their conversation, to that feedback that they're going to bring to the table, right? Just don't just check a box and have them be quiet in the corner. right? They're going to come and say their opinions because that's why they're on the group. And you should do that if you're ever on these groups. And someone gave me this advice early on, which was, if you're there, speak up. That's why you're there. And they're not going to just expect you to be quiet. But if you do that, they're not going to say anything necessarily either. So step up, speak up, and make your voice heard. But ultimately, that people are looking too. That's something that came up in our group, that people are looking. They're looking at the patterns and they're looking at the trends of your organization. And just like Dr. Franks was talking about in NESP, how he's very intentional on making sure the people he brings in on board. That's something we've been thinking a lot about in our district. I think that's something that we should not be only thinking about now as it's like some new thing, but in general, we should be making sure that if someone has to, if you were going to take your group of leaders and stand them right in front of everybody, what would they look like? And how are they being chosen? And so that's something that we discussed pretty in depth, and I really appreciate the dialogue with them.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jacks. I like the fact that you point out diversity, and I keep stressing in all of my equity presentations, diversity does not mean inclusion. So I'm very happy that you're pointing out that once they come in, expect to hear diverse perspectives. Because sometimes I find that in many organizations, they say, oh, we're diverse. Yes, but remember that old adage, diversity means you're invited to the dance. There's a diverse group of people at the dance, but has anyone invited anyone to dance on the dance floor? So that speaks to that perspective that you're talking about. All right, so now we go to Dr. Saylor.
Thanks so much, Dr. Thompson. So in our breakout group, we looked at some Delaware data and some national data and talked about the fact that there are 50% more female teachers than male teachers. So when you look at that, you think, okay, women are doing well. But then the next slide that I shared with them was how that gap shrinks when you look at the number of female versus male principals. So yes, there are more female principals than males, but that gap that was at 50% shrinks to about 10 or 20%. So we spent some time talking about the historical reasons why men are being promoted at faster rates to the principalship. If you haven't looked at that study that's bulleted there, it is a good study, held down and held back. It is actually by a researcher from the University of Delaware, Lauren Bales. Some of the findings in that study were that women were more likely to be principals in elementary schools. No surprise, right?
Yeah.
Males are disproportionately high school principals, district office leaders, and superintendents. So nationally, 75% of all superintendents are men. We shared that in Delaware. We only have one. We'll soon have two female superintendents. Here's some interesting other findings from that report, that female superintendents hire more female principals, and that school boards that are made up of a majority of females will actually more likely hire a female superintendent. So you start to see how you can do some predicting when it comes to the outcomes of those superintendent searches based on the gender of your superintendents. And then, interestingly, a pathway to the superintendency is through the high school principalship. And remember, we said earlier that most high school principals are men. So it's a more male-dominated role. So men are getting in there to the district office superintendents faster. And high school principals make about $7,000 more than an elementary school principal. Mm-hmm. We wrapped it up then with talking about the recommendation from that study, which is that promotion rates increase when mentors match the mentees, both race and gender. So the challenge that I gave the women in that group is that if we want to change the promotion rates for women in that data, the women on the call need to start mentoring other women, whether they are aspiring leaders or assistant principals, so that we can change that data, get more females into district office and superintendent roles in the country. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Dr. Thompson.
All right, thank you so much. I do like data-driven conversations, because when you back up with that qualitative piece with some qualitative data. We get a full picture. So we got a full, nice mixed methods going on there. And it's always great. You know, of course, everybody knows I have one leg over in Delaware and one in Maryland, but I'm going to pull up and straighten up. So I'm very happy to hear that. And I like what you've given out to the call to action to all the women. So thank you for that. So are there any questions from anyone? Just throw it in the chat.
So, Andrea, I think we're way past our time. I think maybe I'm just saying, guys, I gotta go pick up a daughter at dance class.
Okay.
But I just want to be respectful of everyone's time. I know it's late on the East Coast, but if there are any pending questions, could we maybe ask? Do we have everyone's email? I'd love for our panelists to maybe make their emails available. Because I know that we might want some more questions, or if there's any pending questions, you can put them in the chat really quick. I just want to be respectful of everyone's time.
Right. What's the next slide? Because you're controlling the slides. Okay.
No, I'm not. It's honor. It's honor.
Oh, it's honor. Okay. So there it is. Also their Twitter. Lovely group. Lovely group. Mm-hmm.
There's a question.
Andrea, I don't have a question, but I have a comment, please.
Yes.
Yes.
I would be remiss if I didn't thank NAESP staffers, Dr. Gracie Branch and Honor Feedy, for their help and support in putting this together. Thank you very much, ladies.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Yes.
So we did have one question. How can female principals leaders become more effective in the ed political realm? I know that Dr. Gomez talked a little bit about that political realm and getting involved. I don't know if there's a few words you can share on that. Anyone can share a few words on that?
I'll go first. Get involved. Get involved. Contact those people that represent you at the State House here in Washington, D.C. You have to let your voice be heard. Let them know who you are. Invite them to your school. You have to get involved.
Thank you.
Period. We end with the period. Yes, that's the way to do it.
So I want to thank all these. I want to thank the panel of men who took their time to read the book with us, to share with us, discuss every single perspective. You've helped us create a very powerful video that we're going to be sharing around the country with all the groups. So I want to thank you so much for your time. So if anyone has anything that he would like to say before we
I just want to echo Andrea from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you very much. And we hope to continue the working relationship with you all. And you reach out to us as well if there's anything that we can help you with.
Yes.
All right. Have a wonderful evening, night over in the East Coast. And until next time.
Yes. Thank you. You're welcome, Franks. Mm-hmm.